This is this is the vulnerability assessment presentation by Mohammed Mustaf. The summary, executive summary. Two secret systems consisting of a Linux server and a Windows server were scanned by using GVM and Nmap scanner tools. The server is 192.168.1.30. The results were for two of the high severity type on each of the two servers and two of the medium severity type on each of the two servers. The two of a high severity type exposed the two systems to severe threats like remote code execution and unauthorized access. The two of medium severity type include the software versions that have the potential of leading to exploitation if left unfixed. Remediation is recommended with a focus on patch management, disabling of unnecessary services, and hardening of user authentication. Overall, the systems represent moderate to high risk if vulnerabilities are not remediated in a timely fashion. By addressing the critical and medium by addressing the critical and medium problems identified in this assessment, the organization can significantly enhance its cybersecurity posture and reduce exposure to possible threats. Technical summary. A comprehensive technical analysis was done using Greenbone Vulnerability Manager for vulnerability scans and Nmap for open port and active service detection on Windows and Linux targets. GVM provided detailed analysis of vulnerabilities by severity levels as per CVS scoring, while Nmap provided the detection of active services that could be used as attack points. The audit uncovered medium to critical level vulnerabilities. On the Windows Server, the SMB v1 protocol was still enabled and numerous security patches were missing that are considered critical regarding ransomware attacks such as WannaCry. On the Linux server, a vulnerable version of the OpenSSH and unsafe SSL protocols were present, making the system susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack. All of the results were accurately recorded and useful recommendations were provided, such as disabling vulnerable services, software patches, and security best practices. High Findings Windows 1. SMB v1 is a legacy file sharing protocol susceptible to various types of attacks such as notorious WannaCry ransomware attack. Enabling SMB v1 opens a doorway for high levels of remote code execution and lateral movement in a network. Recommendation and fixes. Disable SMB v1 via the following PowerShell command. Set SMB server configuration. Enable SMB1 protocol. It is also advised that SMB-v1 dependencies are scanned on systems and updated to SMB-v2 or SMB-v3. Microsoft Windows Remote Desktop Server vulnerable to Bluekeep. The Bluekeep Remote Desktop Service remains exposed and unpatched. It's seriously vulnerability that allows remote attackers who have not authenticated to execute arbitrary code. Recommendations and fixes. Apply all the security patches and immediately using Windows Update prioritizing particularly the KB4499175 patch for Windows 7 or the equivalent update for the other versions of Windows. If RDP is unnecessary, then it needs to be disabled or access must be limited using a VPN and firewall rules. High Findings Linux 1. OpenSSH legacy version. A vulnerable version of OpenSSH was found that was prone to numerous attacks including user enumeration and potential memory corruption attacks. Here are the recommendation and fixes that I would recommend. Upgrade OpenSSH to the latest stable version, which is currently 9.x, by running sudo apt get update, sudo apt get install OpenSSH server. Restart the SSH service after the update by running sudo systemctl restart sshd. High findings Linux 2. SSL/TLS weak protocols enabled. The server continues to support both SSL v3 and TLS 1.0, which have been deprecated and susceptible to the Poodle and Beast attack. Some of my recommendation and fixes would be modify the SSH and web server configuration files to disable SSL v3 and TLS 1.0. For example, for Apache, modify ssl.conf to include SSL protocol all-SSLv2-SSLv3-TLSv1-TLSv1.1, and then make sure you restart the server afterwards. Medium findings for Windows 1. Missing security headers, HTTP response. The IIS server is missing key HTTP headers like content security policy and X-frame options, making it vulnerable to clickjacking and XSS attacks. Some of the recommendations and fixes that I would have for it would be configure the IIS web server to add security headers. So, for example, would be to use the web.config file to add system.webserver HTTP protocol, custom headers, add name equals X-frame options value equals deny, add name content security policy value equals default src self, custom headers, HTTP protocol, system.webserver. Medium findings Linux 1. Exposed FTP service. A vulnerable open FTP server was found on the Linux host, which in turn was exposing the host to interception of credentials and brute force attacks. Some recommendations and fixes I would have for this would be to disable FTP service unless necessary. If required, replace it with SFTP. To disable FTP would be to sudo systemctl disable vsftpd, sudo systemctl stop vsftpd. If continuing to use FTP, make sure to enforce TLS encryption, FTPS. Medium findings Windows 2. Outdated Microsoft.NET framework. The server uses an outdated and unsupported version of the .NET framework that contains a number of vulnerabilities and lacks new security features. Some recommendation and fixes I would have for this would be upgrade to the newest version supported by the .NET framework, or switch to .NET Core, update through the Microsoft Download Center, or by going through the Windows Update. So now these are the medium findings for Linux 2. So Apache directory listing enabled. The Apache web server was improperly configured to permit directory listing, which in turn was making the file structures available on the web. Some recommendations and fixes I would have for this. So what I would say to do is disable directory listing by modifying Apache's configuration file. So this would be that you'd see Apache 2 apache2.config or the relevant site config and ensuring the options-indexes directive exists. Make sure to restart Apache sudo service apache 2 restart. That is the end of the presentation.